The Stanley Cup Playoffs do not sleep, and neither do we. What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingen. I'm joined tonight by Mike Agello and Michael Trakos, and we are here live to recap everything that happened in Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Final between the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers. Edmonton takes this one in overtime, 5-4. Series is now tied at 2-2. Early on, seemed like we kind of knew where this was headed. Florida took an early 3-0 lead in the first period, went 2 for 3 on the power play. Edmonton came back, scored 4 unanswered, and it looked like now we know Edmonton's going to win it. And then Sam Reinhart, with 19 seconds left in the third period, ties it. The second latest goal in a Stanley Cup final game. The latest was by Corey Perry a couple games ago. So that's how this series has gone. They head to overtime, and then of course Leon Draisaitl wins it for Edmonton in overtime. So we are going to get into all of the nitty gritty there, but wherever you are watching us, do want to remind you, whether it's on YouTube, X, Instagram, Facebook, any of that, we encourage you to send us all of your questions and your comments about the game. It was quite a game, and if you stayed up late for overtime, we definitely want to hear from you and answer your questions if we can. I guess whoever wants to take this one first, I think that with Mike Agello is pointing at Michael Trakos. I think that, again, we ended last or whatever day it was, Monday's show, whenever game 3 was, Monday's show. We ended it. We talked a lot about the goaltending for Edmonton. Stuart Skinner had to get pulled in the third period. They brought in Calvin Pickard, talked a little bit about what is going to be the move for game 4. Should they go with Pickard or should they go with Skinner? Of course, they end up going with Skinner to start game 4. He was pulled after giving up those 3 goals in the first period. Again, Edmonton couldn't stay out of the box, but if we're looking at sort of overall the goaltending, the penalties, everything that went down in that first period for Edmonton, were you all thinking it was a little bit of like, oh, here we go again?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be another 6-1 or even worse, Emma. I thought this one had blowout written all over it. And can I just say 2 things? Like, no more penalties. I'm so tired of this. And no more overtimes. Like, what time is it? It feels like much later. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just all we get is overtimes for this series, and that should be a good thing. But I'm sorry, I'm looking over to my colleague Michael Agello here, and he looks like he's half asleep because we were 19 seconds away from the Edmonton Oilers making this a 2-all series. And while we get that result, it just feels like this game has been a microcosm of the series. Like, just when you think Florida's got it all figured out, Edmonton comes back and Florida punches back, Edmonton punches back. I guess, it looks like we're in for a 7-game series where it's going to go the distance, and we probably should be happy about that. I'm just worried that we're going to probably see another, 3 overtime games. So, buckle up, everyone.
Yeah, everybody drink your coffee. Yeah. Make sure you got it ready. Mike, what did you think?
I had 2 cups. Well, this series is not for the faint of heart, clearly. I mean, I think I'll use the line I use for Leaf playoff games. The ERs in Edmonton and Sunrise should stock up on their nitroglycerin pills, because it's, you're getting to the point here where, people are going to have, arrhythmias. I just find it weird that the Florida Panthers have lost 4 games. They lost 3 games to Toronto. Other than that, they've lost 4 games, and 3 of them were at home. So they lost Game 6 against Toronto. They lost the 1 game against Tampa. They won a lot. So they've lost 3 games in Sunrise. And for a team that is as dominant as they've been on the road, they've been mortal at home. And this was a game that if they lose this series is going to be the turning point where they're up 3-0, and they did the thing that good teams and championship teams don't do. They sat back and thought that their opponent was toast, giving up 9 goals in the last 4 periods. But Edmonton had another thing in mind, and they came back and won the game.
Yeah, I mean, what did we say after last game? What does Edmonton need to do to come back in the next game, stay out of the penalty box? What did they not do in the first period, especially? Stay out of the penalty box. And it looked like we knew where this was going. Before we do get into the rest of kind of the details of everything here, I want to especially talk about that first period. I do want to remind you all that Playoff Frenzy Live is presented by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. Head over now and gear up. All right. It looked like the Florida Panthers were well on their way to another blowout win, like Michael said. I mean, Matthew Tkachuk on the power play twice. Of course, Mike Agello, I knew you were probably like banging your head against the wall saying, of course, Evander Kane was the first guy in the box for Edmonton. Of course he was.
Yeah.
But, Florida goes 2 for 3 on the power play. Edmonton's penalty kill just looked lost. I'm curious what you guys saw. What about that Florida power play is so challenging to defend against in particular?
It's a good question. It's not like they've got an Evan Bouchard who's firing it from the point. They do have some talented guys. The one thing I am noticing, Emma, is that they're not obviously not afraid to go hard to the net. When you've got Tkachuk, you've got Bennett, you've got some guys that are used to scoring those greasy goals. But on that one, I guess the 5-on-3, what I did notice, and they mentioned this on the Sportsnet broadcast. I don't know if you saw this on the TNT broadcast, but they had Ryan Nugent-Hopkins take the draw, and obviously he's banged up, and he's got a bit of a broken wing there. So obviously, not the strongest on the faceoffs, loses it cleanly. And, Tkachuk was able to just basically go in unchecked and fire a shot from the slot. So, that's a question where, you got to wonder why Chris Knoblauch had Nugent-Hopkins there. Obviously, he's one of their better penalty killers, but when he can't take a draw and take it cleanly, maybe you're better off having someone else who's better in the faceoff circle there.
Florida, strangely, I mean, you see Toronto with a 5-forward power play and most power plays in the NHL with 1 defenseman and 4 forwards. Florida is odd because they're using Ekblad and Seth Jones on their number 1 power play. And they're pretty, I mean, Seth Jones is not known for his offense. He's pretty decent, but not great. Ekblad is, I think, thought of better. But with all the forwards that they have, it's a little strange that they have 2 defensemen on their power play. And I somehow think that's the reason they have that is because McDavid is out there and Draisaitl is out there. And they're basically playing defense while they're playing offense. But, Emma, to your mentioning of Evander Kane, I know this won't happen. But he would be benched in Game 5. He just continues to be reckless with his stick, with hitting people in the wrong place. He is a skating penalty, and he shouldn't be in the lineup, but he will be because, he probably had like 12 hits today. He didn't. Usually he has like who
are you gonna put in? Like, you don't have a Hyman now, Mike. So like,
I would put Arvidsson back in. I would take
ahead of Kane.
The way Kane is,
you really do want Florida to win it seems like.
No. I'm saying this from an Edmonton winning position. I think Evander Kane has been a liability for them, taking the amount of, I mean, one penalty can cost you the series, and he continues to take penalty after penalty after penalty. Now, the downside is Arvidsson and Skinner are smaller forwards, and then you're giving Florida the size advantage, but I don't think they're as dumb as Evander Kane has been taking the penalties that he has.
Skinner had a great game. Like that was a great decision on Knoblauch to put him in the lineup. That line was outstanding tonight. Like Skinner very easily could have had a couple goals and was mixing it up, was playing a heavier game than I think he's ever played. So, Evander Kane, correct me if I'm wrong, he didn't see a whole lot of ice in the final minutes of the first period. Granted, Edmonton was killing penalties the entire time, but it's weird. Like, I blame the Oilers partially for not being disciplined, but let's be honest, like the refs missed a ton of calls the other way. Like that was as one-sided as I've seen it in that first period where, Verhaeghe gets away with a high stick on one of the goals.
On the one
there was another high stick that went unchecked. Like if you're going to call them both ways.
Yeah, no, the officiating in this game was obscene. I mean, the high stick that I think was on Wallman or Kulak behind the net, hit him in the visor, no call, and then the puck goes out and Lundell scores late in the first period. I mean, that could have been the series right there. Of course, they pull Skinner and they put in Pickard, and Stuart Skinner his job the rest of the series will be handing water bottles to his teammates because he will not see the ice unless there's an injury to Pickard.
I want to go back for a second because, Michael, you mentioned Jeff Skinner coming in. He did have a really good game for Edmonton. He was not the only new face we saw in the lineup for Edmonton. Troy Stetcher also draws in. Both of those guys seeing the ice for the first time in this Stanley Cup final series. So, of course, with those guys coming in, John Klingberg, Victor Arvidsson, as you mentioned, Mike, are out. Objectively, what do you think of the lineup changes? Obviously, now we could say that Skinner was a good ad, but Mike, sounds like I think you said you would put Arvidsson back in over Kane.
Right.
Michael Trakos, what did you think of the lineup changes? Were they a mistake? Do you think they really had that much of an impact on the outcome of this one for Edmonton?
Yeah, Stetcher played, I think, 4 minutes and change.
Yeah.
So probably not the impact that, I don't know if I noticed him at all, to be honest, on the ice. With Jeff Skinner, that's a no-brainer. I think you put him back in the lineup. And, that lineup decision for me, like obviously Klingberg out, he's more of a puck-moving defenseman for Stetcher. But really offensively to have Jeff Skinner go in, a smaller-sized guy. Granted, Arvidsson is also smaller. That was a bit of a spark plug. I think for sure that goes in. He goes into the next game. The other big addition was, putting Cal Pickard in for the second period. That caught me by surprise. I don't think that I would have blamed Stuart Skinner really on any of those goals. Like two of the three were on the power play.
Mm-hmm. Especially that first one, the first one from Tkachuk, that angle. I mean, it's hard to blame Skinner for that one.
So that looked like it was more of just all right, we just need a momentum change.
Yeah.
Mike, you're saying for sure you're going to go back to Pickard. I kind of agree with you. Yeah. At the same time, what a weird scenario. Like it's been such a roller coaster for Stuart Skinner. Like he was awful against LA. Cal Pickard comes in, he gets hurt. Stuart Skinner comes back in, was just amazing in the next two rounds. And then here we are again, and it looks like Stuart Skinner's reverted to his old self again. So I'm kind of with you, Michael Agello. I think that you have to give the net back to Cal Pickard, but would you actually be surprised if we don't see Skinner back in the net again, just with how these playoffs have gone?
Well, I mean, I get that sort of Ilya Samsonov vibe. I mean, if Pickard stays healthy, he's in there for the rest of this series. Yeah. But he was injured, and that was the only reason he left when I think it was against Vegas, and he was 6-0 at that point. So, the only way you see Skinner is if Pickard gets hurt again, and we hope that doesn't happen. But, yeah, I mean, I think it was a momentum change, pure and simple. Do I blame Skinner for any of the 3 goals? No, he had no chance on the Lundell goal. But at a certain point, you just have to say, this isn't working. He's given up 9 goals in 4 periods. We need something to change things up. And, the funny thing is, in my mind's eye, I look at Calvin Pickard and I see the guy who played for the Toronto Marlies a few years back. And that's not the same guy. I mean, he's a backup in the NHL, but backups can get hot, and he's hot. So you ride that guy as long as you can.
Yeah, he's looking like Matt Murray circa Pittsburgh Penguins 2018. Or sorry, am I bringing up bad memories for you there, Emma?
Hey, I was raised a Penguins fan, so actually I do remember that very well. But I remember it a little differently than the rest of my local Nashvillians here. To that end about Skinner and Pickard and who do you start in Game 5, I think to that end, I think that God forbid if something does happen to Pickard and you do have to bring Skinner back, we've seen now that tends to be where he shines, is when he's been sat for a couple games and then he comes back in. So in an ideal world, you start Pickard for the next game, and then if something happens and you need to go to Skinner, you can, and ideally he'll be fresh and you'll get the best version of him. All right. Talked about the first period. Again, if you are just joining us, this is the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. Emma Lingen, Mike Agello, Michael Tracos talking about Game 4. Edmonton takes this one, evens up the series at 2-2. Busy first period, lots of penalties, at least lots of penalties for Edmonton. Then we go into the second period. And again, we're entering this part of the game and thinking we already know how this is going to end, right? We said, it looks like another blowout for Florida. Here we go. Edmonton, to their credit, really came out looking like a different team in the second period. I think that they were sharper, they were faster. I think part of that may have been the goalie change, that can have an impact on the rest of the team and how they play. I think that they get on the power or on the scoreboard with a power play goal of their own, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and then Darnell Nurse brings the Oilers within 1 in this one, which I thought was interesting because if you'll recall, last Stanley Cup final, last playoffs in general, Nurse was under a lot of scrutiny for just the lack of offense that he provided from the blue line, I think, and just sort of being invisible back there. So how big was it for him to score? He factored on the next goal, the tying goal for Edmonton as well. So how big was it for him, but also for the Oilers, defensive core, as this is a team that we've talked about before that has, been pretty weak defensively?
I think Darnell Nurse is always going to be that guy that, he's going to be polarizing. And I talked to a lot of folks in Edmonton, and, they're still, you look at his contract, and I don't think he's ever going to be the guy that lives up to a contract that's paying him $9.25 million per year. That being said, it was a huge goal for him, and it's the kind of goal that, is going to curry a lot of favor with those Oilers fans. And, it's something that we used to see a lot out of Darnell Nurse. Before Evan Bouchard, Nurse was that guy that was getting passes from McDavid and Draisaitl, and the defenseman always pinching up and providing offense. So, I think the Oilers are going to need that out of him. It was a great shot. It was funny. I was hearing the commentator saying, oh, yeah, second shot where they put it underneath the crossbar on Bobrovsky as if they've got the book on him. Like it's an easy shot to have. Yeah. If anyone could just bury it under the crossbar, sure. No goalie can save those pucks. That's just a great shot. But yeah, to my point, that's something that the Oilers need. And I think something that Darnell Nurse definitely needed.
Well, last year he was clearly playing injured. I think after the season that he had a list of injuries, and he was also playing with Cody Ceci, which is, not the greatest defender. I remember from his days in Ottawa and Toronto, and he actually played better in Dallas. But Nurse has stepped it up this year, and I think he's played a lot better. I do think, though, unless there's an injury with John Klingberg, you can't have 5 defensemen playing over 20 minutes. You had one defenseman, I think it was Ekholm, that played over 30. No, it was Bouchard that played 30 minutes and 38 seconds. So you have, and Stetcher played 4 minutes and 18 seconds. That's like him not even being there. So, you have to put Klingberg, if he's not hurt, back in the lineup. And eat some of those minutes and lessen the load on a guy like Ekholm and a guy like Bouchard.
All right, here's an interesting question we got from a viewer. Who is the most to blame on Florida for that collapse? Like I said, they had the commanding 3-0 lead, end up giving up 4 unanswered, do come back to tie it, but again, result ends up being the same and Edmonton wins. I think that there can be certainly a lot of blame to go around, but I'll ask you two, whoever wants to go first. I mean, who would you kind of say needs to step up on Florida to turn, or if they had stepped up, that maybe this would have ended differently for them?
Who's to blame? I'm on Team Swift on this one.
Oh, God.
Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, get the heck out of there. You're jinxing them.
God, I mean, if give me $1 for every time they panned. It was like, Kachuk scores. They showed Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. I don't care. I'm watching the Stanley Cup final. She's a great singer.
This double hurts Mike because he's such a Bills fan.
Oh yeah. Please, she didn't come to the last playoff or the regular season game in Buffalo because she was afraid people were going to throw snowballs at her. No, I mean, I don't care about that was just a sideshow, but no, I mean, honestly, it's weird. I almost think that the person you blame is Sam Bennett, because he took the penalty early in the second period that gave Edmonton the power play that got RNH the goal. And then you just got that once they got that goal and make it 3-1 for people who were rooting for Florida, you're like, oh boy, here we go. And then Nurse scores on that perfect shot. And then 10 seconds after the goal, Barkov shoots it over the glass, and then Podkolzin ties it. It was Florida's best Edmonton Oiler imitation, because they did in the second period what Edmonton did in the previous 4 periods. Stupid penalty after stupid penalty.
All right. Well, I got to ask about this one, and I have a feeling, just a hunch, that Mike Agello is going to have some thoughts on this one. Okay. Third period, Evan Bouchard takes the hit from behind from Carter Verhaeghe, heads down to the locker room towards the end of the period. No penalty called. Thoughts on the non-call? I know your thoughts on officiating in general, but on that one in particular, Mike, what did you see there?
Was Meryl Streep wearing number 2 in Edmonton Oilers garb? Because that was the best acting job I've seen in a while. I mean, it really wasn't an impact.
Not even a male actor, Meryl Streep.
Oh, sorry. Well, she can play a man. That's how good of an actress she is. Okay, Denzel Washington. Okay, but yeah, I thought it was a complete acting job. I really did. I didn't look like, Verhaeghe did not jump up. He was on his skates. Bouchard had his back to the play and stayed with his back to the play. Almost, it was like, okay, hit me so I can do my best, Denzel imitation. So I thought the referees actually got it right, because I thought that was pure acting.
And you thought the Draisaitl elbow that followed that up, that was a good call?
Boy, chicken wing Forsling. Yeah. I mean, I think that was clear. I mean, I'm not trying to be.
He ran his head into his elbow on purpose.
Here, I'm skating by and I got my elbow up, and here, let me just nudge you.
I think if you're not going to call one, you can't call the other. I think that's the whole problem with tonight's officiating, is that it just seemed like so inconsistent.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, high sticks were sometimes being called, sometimes not. I don't think that was a dive. Like, he got ran from behind, Mike.
I think it was a dive. I really do. I think, hey, sorry.
Hey, if you see an outstretched elbow and you run into it head first, gamesmanship. That's all it is, right? You gotta take the advantages where you can. To that end, though, last game it seemed like a lot of what we were talking about was Edmonton, of course, could not stay out of the box, but it wasn't just the quantity of penalties. It was, they did have 85 penalty minutes in game 3, but it was the quality. It was that they were undisciplined, they were sloppy, they looked panicked. They were all just very avoidable penalties. Of the penalties they committed tonight, and now again, maybe that you take this with a grain of salt because as we just talked about, the officiating may be a little bit inconsistent. But what did you think of just the overall play of the Oilers tonight, from a discipline standpoint? Do you think that they, really kind of learned their lesson after game 3 in that regard and were able to kind of just like set all of that nonsense aside and actually focus on what they had to do?
Yeah, I give the Oilers full marks. That first period, the ice was tilted. It looked like the refs were against them. They're down 3-0. And then they come out with that second period where they end up tying things up. That is very hard. And that's the definition of being disciplined and just a mature hockey team. Like, I would love to have, seen behind the scenes kind of camera in that dressing room, what McDavid might have been saying, what some of the other leaders might have been saying, because, we were all probably expecting after it being 3-0 that this was going to be a blowout. Instead, Edmonton played their best period in the Stanley Cup playoffs in period 2. And, Draisaitl does get dinged for that penalty. But again, Edmonton still was able to, prevail. And, from that second period going into the third and then taking the lead. And then again, it looking like all the wind is taken out of their sails and then going into the overtime and still being able to win. So that was as gutsy victory as I've seen in these playoffs.
I'll use the line that I used after game 3, and I hope Chris Knobloch going into the locker room said this: cut the crap out. You're taking dumb penalties. You're costing yourself any chance of winning a Stanley Cup by just being dumb. Now the Ekholm high stick on Marchand was completely careless. I've already talked about Kane's penalty and the Darnell Nurse trip on Barkov. He stuck his foot out and just tripped him. I mean, they were avoidable penalties. So, but the thing is, to Michael's point, they did cut the crap out in the second and the third period. They only had the Draisaitl chicken wing for the rest of the game. So they did wise up, and that helped them in their comeback and in their victory.
Yeah, I think definitely officiating is going to play a big role in this series. Of course, now the series tied at 2-2, heads back to Edmonton for game 5. Looking ahead, looking at, we have another question here. I think it's a good one. Other than Connor McDavid, the obvious choice here, who do you think is under the most pressure for the rest of this series to step up for their team, whether it's Edmonton or Florida? Because, we say this all the time, but it's a cliche for a reason. Your best players have to be your best players at moments like this. And I think, at least from my point of view, you could make the argument that the goaltenders are under the most pressure. We've talked about, I think Bobrovsky came up big in big moments for Florida, but again, at the end of the day, didn't end up stealing a game for them. But you really, sometimes I think that there are going to be unlikely heroes. There are going to be the Jake Wallmans who score the go-ahead goals because sure, why not? It's the playoffs, it happens. But I mean, looking forward in this series, just the trajectory of how this is going to go, now we're back at equilibrium, right? We're back at 2-2. no one has, full momentum right now. So who do you think is going to be the biggest X factor for each of these teams going forward?
Mike, I know you're probably going to say Darnell Nurse, so I'm going to say for the Florida Panthers, Sasha Barkov.
Yeah.
He has a pair of assists tonight, but still looking for his first goal. I'm trying to even think when the last time I've even seen him score a goal in these playoffs. And I know Barkov, he's going to make his money, and obviously he's going to win awards for his defensive play as he's won yet another Selke Trophy. But if you're the Florida Panthers, it can't just be Sam Bennett. It can't just be Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Reinhart. Sasha Barkov, he's got to do what McDavid and Draisaitl have also been doing, which is play at both ends of the ice, which means scoring some goals here. So I don't know if he's on the most pressure, but he's the guy that I'm still wondering when he's going to really put a stamp on this series.
Yeah, Barkov's last goal was he scored 2 against Carolina in game 3. Yes, I agree. They need Barkov was the guy I was gonna select. I do know that if not him, I eliminate the goaltenders. The goaltenders are always under pressure, so you can't really say. But for Florida, I would say Sam Reinhart, and Reinhart had some injuries earlier in the playoffs, and he's one of the best scorers in the league, and they need him to be one of the best scorers in the league. And really, he hasn't appeared to be at that level. Now, he had 3 points tonight, so he did produce. He had a goal and 2 assists. But I think they need that more consistently, especially if, they can't keep McDavid and Draisaitl in check. So I would say Reinhart.
And then obviously Evander Kane, because, the
Well,
Oilers,
if it's up to Mike, Evander Kane's not playing in the next game. So it's off the table.
They need him to rise to the occasion in the press box as he passes the popcorn to Stan Bowman, because he should not be on the ice. That is my opinion. Sorry.
No, hey, that's what we're here for. I think, looking ahead, we have all sort of come to the agreement here. This series is going to go to 7 games. It has to, right? Though, especially the way that it's gone so far. But just looking ahead to game 5, want to wrap up here with some predictions. Game 5 back in Edmonton. What do you guys think happens? Who takes the series lead?
I think Edmonton takes this one. I think Cal Pickard, he's 7-0 right now in the playoffs. He's going to go 8-0 at home at Edmonton, and then we're back in Florida. Hopefully, we'll see how it goes. I still think this is Oilers in 7, so I think it's just going to go back and forth.
Well, I predicted Panthers in 6, so why not 5-4 in overtime like we've had a couple times already, with Sam Bennett hitting it off the crossbar and in this time. And if that happens, you will see the diaspora of that town square in Edmonton. You will see them evacuate there quicker than Leaf fans did after Game 7 in 2013. I still have the video in my mind of everybody scattering after the tying goal because everybody knew they were going to lose. No, I mean, it's a series, obviously. These two teams are very equally matched. They went to 7 games last year. It's going to probably be a very tight game, but why not? I'll say 5-4 Panthers in OT.
All right. Well, there you have it. We will see what happens when this series does head back to Edmonton on Saturday for game 5, of course, tied 2-2 right now. Sure to be an interesting one. We will be back here again on Saturday night after game 5, breaking down all the action here on the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live. So make sure you come back and join us. For tonight, though, that is going to do it. It's late. We've had a lot of overtime. We're all ready to go to bed. So for Michael Tracos and Mike Agello, I am Emma Lingen. This is the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Stix.com. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.